Thank you, Nischala, for taking the time to be
Thank you.
with me this
Thank you.
morning.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure to be here with you, Narayan.
And I'm so glad we're getting the time to talk. Especially during these turbulent times, about
Yeah.
your recent book, The Four Stages of Yoga, which you have there with you. And where could you
Yes.
share for our listeners and viewers where you are, because not everyone is aware of what Ananda is and Ananda
Okay.
Village.
Well, I'm talking to you this morning from Ananda Village in Northern California, and the place I'm located today is at the Library of Higher Consciousness, which is part of Ananda College here at Ananda Village in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. So this is where we are, and Ananda Village is a spiritual community, and we are disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda, the great yogi who wrote the book Autobiography of a Yogi.
Wow.
Good morning.
And
Good morning.
how did you get the inspiration for this book, The Four Stages of Yoga? Where did that come from? And
Well, okay, that's a good question. Well, actually, it's been 20 years. 20 years ago, I had an interview with Swami Kriyananda, who is the founder of Ananda, in Assisi, Italy. And, he had talked to me about the four stages of yoga, about also called the four ashrams of life. And it was an intriguing concept. And so while I was there in Assisi visiting him 20 years ago, and at that time our son was maybe 7 years old, excuse me, I have frog voice.
it's okay, I do too.
I have frog voice. So excuse my frog voice. Okay. So during that interview, he spent about 3 hours with me, and we went into detail of what these four stages were in relation to yogic philosophy. So these are stages that were created by the rishis of India in many years ago, and they were created for the benefit of civilization, to become a higher civilization, to become a more spiritual civilization. So these four stages, they really don't use them anymore in India, is what I've been told, but they signify a time from 24 years to 120, and they're divided into categories. And these categories are the stages of your life in terms of spiritual development. So what you're deeply learning at these four stages in your life. And so the interview that I had with Swami Kriyananda 20 years ago, I said to him, and this came from my heart, I said, I want to write a book about that someday. So of course, 20 years ago, I was a mother, and I had a young son who was very active. And so I really didn't have time to write the book then. But now here it is, 20 years later, and the book is out, called The Four Stages of Yoga. And really, I think it took me 20 years to really understand what these stages of yoga were, because of course I've lived in a spiritual community for 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me all that time to really observe people, see what they were doing. And in the meantime, I traveled throughout the world with our college, the Ananda College, and had the opportunity to meet many great rishis and many great saints, including Mother Teresa of Calcutta, the Dalai Lama, and many great, what I would call rishi souls who are from India. And so I think it's so appropriate that right now we are in the middle of a pandemic, because the pandemic is it's quite interesting. It's really going to be the fall of an old civilization into a new, higher civilization. And we use in yoga, there's a term called the Yuga cycles of time, and they're based on a 24,000 year period during which there are four stages, again, four stages of civilizations. And so these four stages, of course, are Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, and Satya Yuga. And we right now, we are in a transition between Kali Yuga, which is the old, represents the old form-oriented way of living, you know, materialism, consumerism, brick colleges, things that you can see and touch. And we're going into, and you know, you can see and touch, but it means, what it means is form and organization oriented. And we're moving into this higher Yuga, which is Dwapara Yuga, which is the age of energy. And the age of energy, of course, is much more subtle. And it requires us, it's going to require us to use some new tools. And these new tools that we're going to be talking about today in this interview, but also they're in my book, The Four Stages of Yoga. They're tools that we as yogis living here in a yoga community have learned throughout the course of our 50-year existence.
What are some of those hallmarks, would you say, of this new subtle age of energy and how they're coming into education? Because I know you've had a very keen interest, of course, in starting the Ananda college, and you know, having raised a son yourself. How do you see that playing out in terms of education?
Yes, that's a good question. The higher age of energy is going to require that people become more intuitive. And in the way one becomes more intuitive is through meditation. So what is the virus, the COVID-19 broadcasting right now? What is it broadcasting?
A lot of fear.
It's broadcasting, go inside. Everybody needs to shelter at home. I think it's ironic. Go inside is really what's being asked of this next Yuga that we're going into. It's find out who you are, learn who you truly are. Why are you here on this planet? What is your purpose for being here? And what is God? And how can you, through your intuition developed through meditation, affect the planet and help the planet versus this rampant consumerism, destruction of our environment, all the old ways, even education for the last 50 years has been very form-oriented, which is very typical of Kali Yuga. It's form-oriented. You do this, everything's in a box. You do this, this, and this, and therefore you will be able to become, get your degree in college or whatever. So the old way was really, has in the past 20 years has become more almost like an assembly line education, where students are taught certain things, you're given tests, and depending on how well you pass those tests determines whether or not you're good enough to get into a college like Stanford or Harvard. And so it's very, very, what I would say, linear. And we're now going into a much more abstract Yuga, which has to do with energy and subtle energy, and we'll be able to communicate more intuitively. We'll be able to do things more intuitively, and that is going to require meditation, and it's going to require education that really honors the individual. So you're going to see a lot more emphasis on individual learning versus mass learning, and the individual as a soul versus the individual as just a person, one of many 20,000 people attending a certain college. So at Ananda and through our schools from preschool through college, what we teach, what we always have worked for in the past 30 years, is seeing the student as a soul.
Mm.
And so, in that respect, there's many, many things that we have learned over time that will help students and young people become more happy in life and more successful. And more successful in terms of how happy they are, not in terms of how much money they have or what their status is, but in terms of are you really happy each day when you get up? Are you happy about your life and whatnot? And so there's many qualities that we teach in our schools. And so this is a big change that's happening in education. You're going to see, it may take 50 years for it to totally disappear, this old form, but you're going to see, and right now schools, colleges are shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a coincidence. It's not just a coincidence. This virus is equivalent to having a meteor hit our planet. It's going to change the way we do a lot of things. Now I can say, well, I wouldn't say it exactly that way, but it will. And it is already changing people. And so now we've got a new way of life that we've got to move forward to. And God and the universe is asking us to be more aware, to be more aware of our environment, to be more aware of our connection with our environment, that we are all one, we are all truly interconnected. Every soul, every animal, every species, the water is holy, the earth is holy, the air, all of everything here on planet Earth is holy. And I think this next Yuga and this transition that we're going through is going to take us more deeply into that energy. And energy is how we treat each other, how harmonious we're able to live together on this planet. I think harmonious living will be very important. Meditation, the individual, focus on the individual, understanding others. That's a big part of our education that we do here at Ananda and Ananda College, is understanding others. What are their realities? Because we see maturity as the ability to tune in to other people's realities. And we have a lot of people on this planet, and we're going to need to be able to understand who they are and what, on a deeper level, not just, oh, he's a Muslim, he's a Jew, she's a Catholic, whatever. We need to tune into each other as brothers and sisters and as one planet versus just seeing each other as this is the United States and this is India and this is Florida and this is Texas. No, we need to really begin to have a greater awareness, a higher consciousness. And that's really what this book was designed to do. When I wrote it thinking of the future. And my prayers for the book, I thought about, okay, and I didn't know this pandemic was coming because this book took 4 years to write.
Mm-hmm.
But it was giving people a way to live a more satisfying spiritual life from the time they're born till the time they're 120. And so, because we will be living to an older age in this next Yuga. And so it's perfect timing. It's perfect timing, this pandemic, for education for life. It's perfect timing for the 4 stages of yoga. And actually, Education for Life, which is a book that Swami Kriyananda wrote in 1972, gave our schools 4 basic concepts for raising children. And those concepts are based on 6-year increments. So the first one is the foundation years, from the time a child is 6 years old And then the next one is called the feeling years.
Mm-hmm.
And the third stage is called the will years, or the willful years. And the last stage is called the thoughtful years, and that's time from when they're 18 to 24. So these four stages in education for life offer a way. Really, Swami Kriyananda wrote this book for the future. When he wrote it, he said, I'm planting seeds for the future. It's like he knew something was coming. And he's a very intuitive man. And he told us once that his guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, actually gave him intuition as a spiritual gift so that he could see things. And he wrote many books that were very futuristic. So the four stages of yoga is for everyone. It's for adults as well. It goes through these four stages of life, and it offers stories and practical advice and ideas for living in this new expanded awareness that we're going to be coming into.
Nischala, didn't Paramahansa Yogananda, if I recall, in his own autobiography, he talked about how to live schools, right? Starting with the school that he founded for boys in Ranchi in India.
Yeah.
So this is really what you're talking about with education for life, and here in the four stages of yoga and the Ananda schools is an extension of that kind of how to live approach. Is that?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
That it's an extension of this how to live approach. And I guess a follow-up question I have to that is, for someone that's not familiar with education for life or this new approach to education, because there's our current education system, like you said, is so form and kind of curriculum oriented. How do you help people, both teachers and students, have that paradigm shift to being more individual focused? For person to person focused. How do you help people make that shift?
Well, for a student, it requires the instructor or the teacher to really learn to meditate and have a meditation practice, so that, because once you meditate, and you've been meditating for quite a long time, you develop a certain amount of intuition and ability to tune into others. So with an individual approach, you're trying to understand what is the highest in that child. What are some of the qualities that I see as a teacher that they have that no one else has? Because everyone is unique. We're not all the same. And so in the past, it was like, oh, we just, you just learn English, and here's what you learn, and here's the curriculum, and then here are the tests. But no, now in this new age, it's going to be more individually oriented. So we have tools that we've used as teachers to be able to tune in to these young people, and it requires a lot of intuition, and then it requires a lot of practical sense. And so, how can I help this person? This person has a highly intellectual mind, and they're inspired by these kinds of things. And so what can I do as a teacher that will help elevate and improve that specific trait that this person has? So the traits are not just intellectualism. They're also things like qualities, like peacefulness or centeredness, or the ability to be creative, or the ability to help others, to be a good friend. So there's sort of the practical qualities that we teach them, but there's also the values. So if a person is, and there's many different ways. Education for Life is a book you should obviously read if you're interested in this. But I can go on and on. What I do in my book is I share the ways in which many of us have experienced this new way of education and for the public, so that you can take these ideas and try to bring them into your own life, to try to we have many things for the schools and for children, and then we have many things for householders, the householder stage, which is age 24 to 48, and for the forest dweller stage, which is age 48 to 72. And the final stage is the sannyasi stage, which goes from age 72 to 120. So each one of these stages is vitally important. I would have to say, after many years of reflecting on these four stages, that actually the first stage is very important, but the last stage, the sannyasi stage, is probably the most important, because that is when we're beginning to transition into going to our next lifetime, or what we're really doing on this planet, what we've come to do, these kinds of things. So each stage has a particular emphasis. And what I do is I put before the reader various people who I feel have exemplified these four stages of yoga. So, and that is part of the fun and the mystery of this book.
Can you repeat those four stages for me? So we have the student, the forest
So you
dweller.
have the first stage is the brahmacharya stage, or I call it the student stage,
Right.
and that is age 0 to 24. That's the first stage of yoga, and that's basically where education for life focuses in those first 24 years.
Gotcha.
The second stage of yoga is, I'm calling it the householder stage, whether or not a person is married or not, or if they're a monastic during this time frame, or if they're single or whatever. During this second stage of life, there's many spiritual things that your soul is going to be learning and experiencing, and so that goes from age 24 to 48. And so that's the second stage, the householder stage. The third stage is the forest dweller, and that goes from age 48 to 72. The forest dweller, again, you have many things, but it's not necessarily a time when you retire. It may be a time when you're really coming into your full potential of who you are and what you're bringing to the table as far as this planet is concerned, and far as your soul evolution is concerned. And then in the last stage, which goes from age 72 to 120, that is the sannyasi stage. And that is, I think, I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm looking forward to it, because it's a time of deep spiritual involvement and reflection. You have actually more time in that time period of the sannyasi, but it's not a time necessarily to let your guard down and go, oh, I think I'll just watch television or play golf. No, it's a time of deep offering and service, and so I offer many different stories of people who have yogis who have experienced that fourth stage in the book, so that people get an idea. Okay, this is certainly a lot different than my Uncle Henry, or this is different than what my mother taught me. But we're going into a new reality now, and we're going to need some new tools.
What are some of those stories or people that you met and wrote about in the book that were deeply touching to you in regards to that fourth stage, for people to look towards the saints as examples for how to live? Was there one example of that final stage of sannyas that stands out in your mind from the book?
Well, I'm going to use a couple examples, because in 1987, I had the good grace to meet with Mother Teresa in Calcutta, India. And as a young woman, she was my hero. She received a call from God to work with the poorest of the poor in the slums of Calcutta. And being there in 1987, it was a horrendous slum. People were living in cardboard boxes that were only 3 feet tall, a whole family, and that was their shelter. to be crouched down. And so that meeting with Mother Teresa really, for me, as a young woman, she was a female hero. She was a woman. She was a female saint. And she was so inspiring. So what happened during that time when I first met her in 1987 was I was with a group of people from Ananda, and we were going on a pilgrimage to India. And I had said to my friend Asha, who was helping lead the pilgrimage, I said, "Oh, Asha, I really hope I meet Mother Teresa because, she's been a saint who I felt called to really be like her and see her and find out more about her." And Asha said, "Oh, I doubt that that's possible at all. But, we're going to India. We'll see this. We'll see many different saints." And so, I kept saying to her, "Oh, I hope we can meet her." And so, sure enough, Asha and the other tour planners had worked it out so that it was a miraculous, actually, that we could actually see her on a certain day. We went to this, her missions of charity in Calcutta, and all of us were waiting outside because they wouldn't let you come into the missions there until this Sunday service, the Catholic service started. And so we were waiting outside, and we went into the place where the service was being performed. And I'm looking all around. I'm looking all around me. I'm like, "Where's Mother Teresa?" I'm looking throughout this whole place, and there's all these people crowded in there. And Asha, my friend, who's a little bit shorter than I am, was standing next to me. And I looked over to Asha to say, "Where's Mother Teresa?" And right next to Asha was standing Mother Teresa. Well, she's very small. She was only, it seemed like 4 feet tall, or maybe shorter, because she was very bent over. And her eyes were just reaching out with so much compassion and love. I can't begin to tell you that at that moment, I began to see what really it was like to be a saint and to live your whole life living for God and to doing something that God asked you to do, which was not a very pleasant thing. And it was very hard for her. And there was many times in her life that she wanted to give up because success wasn't coming. But she had heard this voice on a train, and God had said to her, "I want you to work with the poorest of the poor in the slums of Calcutta." And so watching her, she was watching the service. And so, I couldn't help but looking at her every couple of minutes. I'd look over, and there she was. She still had that endearing look, and the vibration that she carried was so powerful that it sort of mesmerized all of us, I would say. And so after the service, they said, "Okay, it's time to leave," and they wanted to get all the pilgrims out of the chapel there. And it was a large chapel that was very modest in Calcutta. And so I didn't leave. I stayed in the back with a few others, and I just watched her because, of course, I was just like, I was almost frozen watching her. And she went over to a statue of Jesus, and there was a statue of Jesus up on the cross, and he was looking down. And, of course, a lot of these statues, Jesus has so much compassion in his eyes. And he's looking down, and she went down in front of that statue of him on the cross and looked up into his eyes. And oh my gosh, it was like she and the beloved Christ were having this deep communion, this deep meditation. And it seemed like I can remember, that time seemed to me eternal. That she was actually showing us her devotion to God. And through that devotion to me as a young woman, I feel like that's something that I felt I gained from seeing her be so devoted to God. It was like nothing else matters, nothing else, everything else can wait. But God, what I want to commune with you now. And she was communing with him and praying, and that what I, that's really, I would say, what changed me. And I spent time there with her in the mission of charity, and I went back to see her again in 1990. And, both times I was able to see the way she was working with the poorest of the poor and her, to have someone to be able to love. She was like a living Christ.
Mm.
She was she was a, she was a channel for Christ, and she loved everyone. And you'd see her work with the most disabled people who were, who had bones like sticks and who were dying, and she had them in her charity, her missions of charity, and she would just come in and she'd put her hand on their forehead, and they'd look into her eyes, and it was like seeing God looking into God's eyes. And so that whole experience for me was very transformative. And I talk about it in depth in the chapter on Mother Teresa in my book, which is in the fourth stage of life, the sannyasi stage, because she was older at that time. She was well into her 80s. And so I can only say that, there is that saying that one moment in the presence of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion.
Mm-hmm.
That experience changed me and gave me something that was a great tool in my life. And I hope that my story that I have of Mother Teresa in my book will be as uplifting to others as it was to me to have that experience. So that's one experience. I also talk about Swami Gyanananda, who was a great rishi from India.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that story, that was amazing, because I
Tell us
think
that
he's
story. Yeah, not everyone is familiar.
Swami Gyanananda. Okay, Swami Gyanananda was a great rishi he was from Austria, and he read the autobiography of a yogi on the day that it was given to him. I think it was right in 1946, shortly after it was printed. And he read the autobiography of a yogi, and he left his home, maybe it was Switzerland, I say Austria, and he traveled by foot from Europe to India, and he never came back. And he lived in the Himalayas. He lived up in the Himalayas as a true Himalayan yogi, up in where the snow is, where the mountains are, where it's secluded, and you're there with being able to commune with God. So he lived as like a hermit yogi for many years. And then towards near the end of his life, but really more in his own sannyasi years, he came down from the mountains, and a woman in Dehradun in India offered to create an ashram for him, and he lived in that ashram. And so he was a Kriyaban, he was a Kriya yogi, very highly advanced, I would say. All I can say is that looking at him, he could just look into my mind and read everything. He could see everything. And it was very, it's very humbling to meet someone like that. But also it was a very gracious experience that we had with him. Many, many times with the college when we would travel to India, we would meet with him. He had been a young musician, and when he was young, in his early 20s, he read the autobiography of a yogi and left Europe and went to India in a search for God. And so his story I talk about in this book, and I talk about our specific experience with him. One in particular that I think was very moving, and I'm hoping that the readers will find very fun and very interesting, because you learn a lot about what is a rishi, what is a yogi, what is a saint, and when you see how he lived his life, then it gives us, as I'm not in my sannyasi years yet, but it gives a person who is from age 72 to 120 something to look at, something to aspire to, rather than just playing golf and retiring. So there's things that you can do in your sannyasi years that will greatly benefit your own soul evolution, and it will greatly benefit the planet.
Well, these are beautiful. Thank you for sharing both those experiences. The one with Mother Teresa sounded so profound for you, that like an indelible mark upon your soul that really began your journey of compassion that you brought into education. I wonder, for people where we began, and you were talking about how the pandemic has really been like Divine Mother sending everyone to their room, to take a take a pause. The whole world has been has been sent to their room. What do you say to people? I'm here in Los Angeles, and people are struggling. Struggling with loneliness, depression, feeling isolated. Can you talk a little bit about how you've lived in spiritual community essentially your entire adult life? What would you say to someone that feels like they're stuck in a city and is idealistic and wants to understand these stages of yoga? They want to allow their soul nature to unfold, but they really feel alone, depressed, and just in a bad way.
Well, I totally understand, and I have some of my nieces who live down there, so I'm in touch with them quite a bit, so I know how difficult it is. And I would say, if you can, one of the best things that you can do is learn to meditate. If you're not already meditating, if you are already meditating, I would say, become familiar. In Los Angeles, there's Ananda, Los Angeles, which is an urban community. And that's what I did when I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. I tuned in to the local Ananda community. And I began going there for classes on learning to do the Kriya Yoga meditation. And I began to have satsang with other people who were searching like myself, and other people who were perhaps spiritually lonely. And so that community, that urban community, was really a lifesaver for me at a time in my life when I was a young woman, trying to figure out, I'd left the corporate world and I wanted community. And so I would learn to meditate if you can. I know through Ananda has many meditation classes and techniques. If you can learn, if you already meditate, learn Kriya Yoga meditation. It's what Yogananda said, and he was the avatar, one of the greatest saints of this century. He said that Kriya Yoga is the airplane route to God. And so consider taking Kriya Yoga training. That can help you. It can calm your fears and calm your depression. And then one of the best antidotes for depression is to serve others. So if you're feeling depressed, it's because you're really thinking a lot about yourself. Oh, my life is horrible. I can't go out. I'm living in this tiny little studio apartment and I can't go out. I can only go out for takeout, or I can't see my friends, or I can't talk to anyone. What am I going to do? One of the best things you can do is to find a way to help others. And when you're isolated and you're in seclusion with this pandemic, you can pray for others. You can say nice things to others, anyone that you come in contact. Consider using yourself as a channel to be a warrior of light, to bring goodness and upliftment and peace and harmony into this planet. So that which you are seeking, which is peace, calmness, not being so frightened, all the, getting rid of all the fear. The opposite of fear is love. So love is the antidote for fear. It's so ironic. The reason we have fear is because somehow the love that we have has escaped us for a moment or gone away. I know that times when I become fearful myself, I realize, okay, hold on, take a deep breath, meditate, and look for that inspiration of the love and bliss that you find within in meditation. Then you can help others. Then you can become a channel for really helping the planet at this time. This planet is very sensitive. The animals and the air and the earth, they're all connected. We're all connected. It's not like we do things and it doesn't matter. Everything we do, every moment of our lives matters. And so prayer for others, and you can certainly do it for your family and start within your own home, for your family, for your friends. You have an aging relative or a young child, you can give them love. But know that the pandemic will probably last, it may last another year or two, I don't know. It's going to last until Divine Mother feels we're ready to go, I think, into this newer, higher age.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be a loss of many lives on this planet. And the loss of lives is something that happens during these great transitions that we call the Yuga cycles of time. We've seen them before in a descending Yuga with the Bronze Age when that whole civilization collapsed and it just, everything went away. It didn't happen overnight like being struck by a comet, but it's very similar in that it's going to, maybe for the next 50 years, take its time in helping us usher in this new age. I don't mean to use the word new age as a cliche, but it really is a new age. I don't quite have a better word for it. But you can, join in the virtual Ananda community and, find things that are uplifting to do. All the videos that I see that are available from Ananda are people talking about uplifting things and ways to improve yourself and your soul evolution instead of just, this is how you make a scrambled egg omelet with blah, 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 blah. Yeah, there's all the cooking channels. There's all the great fashion channels. There's all this stuff. But what does it matter if you are not happy, if you have a lot of fear? So tune into those things that will uplift you. And I would say, if you're in Los Angeles, get involved with the Ananda community in Los Angeles. If you're in India, there's Ananda communities in Mumbai and Delhi, or there's Ananda centers, and Pune and Bangalore and Chennai, and throughout India, there's Ananda centers and communities that are there for support. And, we're going into a new age that has a different kind of religion, too. This isn't religion based on going to a church and just sitting there and listening to someone lecture. This is based on self-realization.
Mm-hmm.
And self-realization is being able to go inside yourself and meditate and find the peace and bliss within, so that you don't have to go necessarily to a church to get it, but you have to go inside and you have to do the work. So you can't let someone else do it for you. You can't say, I went to my church and I'm fine this week. Self-realization is something you do every day of your life. Myself, I meditate twice a day, sometimes more. I do healing prayers for others. There's many things that we can do together as a planet to help build this this new awareness that's coming. And I know many of us and those that could be watching this feel this way. What can I do? Well, if you're praying and you're putting out good energy for others with your prayers, you're already doing something that you may not see the results. No one's going to come and say, oh, Mary, she prayed for them, those people. They're not going to do that. God is, it's between you and God. So there's no one who's going to give you the gratification that you may have thought you needed in the old way. The old way was much more ego driven, where, you know, money and things and materialism is what was driving the civilization. Now the civilization is going to change, and we're going to have to live more simply. Yogananda said, simple living and high thinking lead to the greatest happiness. Simple living and high thinking. And maybe that simple living means giving up a lot of things that weren't necessary before. Maybe that's why we're all having to isolate. Going inside, we're going to our room and we're thinking about, okay, how can I be a better person? What can I do as an individual? Maybe I'll grow a garden, a vegetable garden. Maybe I won't become so dependent on Amazon.com. That's a new thought. I mean, I use Amazon.com. That's where my book is. But maybe we don't become dependent on these things. Maybe we find new ways. Maybe we start eating out of our garden. That's what our family is trying to do this summer. A group of us have gotten together and created a beautiful garden of vegetables so that we won't have to be having to go to the markets, and that, you know, we can also share that food with others. Community living is wonderful, and it is going to be the way people will live in the new age from once things change, which they will. It may take another 50 years of gradually changing, but Yogananda says that that's the blueprint for the future. And it's not just here in the United States. It's in India, it's in China, it's in Europe, it's in New Zealand, it's everywhere. Everyone will be wanting to live in these smaller communities because you'll be able to be in a group of like-minded friends. And there's many different kinds of communities that we can choose from. But the kind that I live in is a spiritual community, and it's radically different from a community that's just an intentional community, though they are good too.
What you were sharing about the communities movement and plain living and high thinking, it reminded me, Yogananda said, paraphrasing, that I believe part of this crisis that we're going through, that people would lose half their wealth, but they would be twice as happy. And I think that's speaking to what you're and that's happening, isn't it? Right now, people have lost a lot of wealth. They've had to radically simplify their lives, and yet many people are finding. So I want to thank you for that, because I think there can be such a focus on, you know, in the news, the bad of all the. Of course, we could go on and on about the bad things, but what's really happening is this ushering in of a beginning of a new age, like you were sharing. And that simplicity, I think, of heart, that pureness of heart that you were expressing, that you saw Mother Teresa, that has been the pole star of your life. You reminded me, I love reading about near-death experiences and books like that. They're so they're so hopeful, right? And there was this one young boy who had a near-death experience, and when he was in it, he had this flashback in his life review of when he had to go. He was driving with his family, and they pulled over to the side of the road, and he had to get a bucket of water from a pond to bring back for their camping. I forget what it was. And he saw this tree, and he just wanted to give the tree some water because the tree looked like it needed, and he poured some of the water in the tree. And in his life review, he felt the whole universe rejoice because it was just an act of selfless giving. I think
that's a beautiful story.
Yeah, and didn't you share about your own experience
Yes,
of having a near
yes,
death experience in this book?
yes. That actually, I have to say that was the most difficult thing to write about in this book was my near-death experience that I had when I was 7 years old. When I was 7 years old, I was out on the lake in a inner tube, and I had come from a big family, and I thought some of my brothers were nearby, and so I was out there just playing along, and all of a sudden, what happened was I slipped from my inner tube, and I started because I wasn't a good swimmer at that time, and I started to submerge. The inner tube went from me because oftentimes when you slip, you they fly away, and so the inner tube flew away, and I was at that time I could barely dog paddle, and I was dog paddling, and I began to drown, and I can remember that instant like it was yesterday. It was so life changing. And so as I went down into the water, I was coming up and going down and coming up and gasping for air and then going down. And finally, I just felt this incredible weakness, like all my energy had drained. And I just went down into the water and I realized I couldn't fight it anymore, that I had to surrender. And I felt myself saying to my higher self, maybe saying to me, I'm dying. And as I said that I'm dying, and I kept going further down into the water, and I could still feel this, sort of green, murky water, I began to really let go. And as I let go and went down further, I had my near death experience,
Wow.
which is um, all I can say is it's different for everyone, but for me and for many that have had it, there was a light that I was going into, and the light that came to me during that experience just wrapped me in a cocoon so that I all of a sudden had no sense of space or time. In
Mm.
those moments, time didn't exist. I could have been there for 100 years
Mm.
for 1 second and I wouldn't have known. And I became more blissful. I became more peaceful. And I can remember saying to myself, oh my gosh, I never want to leave
Mm.
this experience. And it was, there were other things that happened, but again, I was 7 years old at the time and I couldn't really articulate very well. So the next thing I remember after being in that very blissful state was I was on the dock, the swimming dock, and they were trying to resuscitate me and push the water out of me and, bring me back. And that is then all of a sudden at one point I did come back. But that experience, I would say, was the experience that made me realize there was something else. I didn't know how to get to it because again I was 7 years old. I was living in a family that was very religious, but not necessarily wanting to hear about a near death experience. I mean, when children are young and they have a profound experience, as parents, I think nowadays, maybe at that time because I had such a big family, you want to be able to listen to them and find out what's happening with them. At that time, I just couldn't talk to anyone in my family because I was the second to the youngest of 7 children, and I just was very shy and timid, and I couldn't articulate what had happened. So it really wasn't until I started doing yoga with my nerd friend and I in college years before this was popular. And we started doing yoga and we were like 12 or 13 and we were doing these yoga postures And I was, you know, I like to do headstands because I was into gymnastics and all that, and I would do headstands for a long time. And then all of a sudden, after the headstand, I would just like be in this state of like, what was that? Something came over me like bliss or, you know, this energy come wafting over my body. And so then I had some experiences that I share in the book about what happened after that. But I began to meditate after doing yoga, and I was about 12 or 13. And it wasn't really until after college that I got back into meditation through finding Ananda and finding my guru, my great guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, seeing his photograph in a bookstore in Menlo Park, California, and just looking into his eyes and going, that person can help me. And I just couldn't take my eyes off of him. And so that experience brought me, and then now in meditation. So as I learned to meditate, I began to have a lot of those same experiences that I had in my death experience.
Wow.
I had experiences of going into the light. And let me tell you, because I was brought up Christian household, I was very worried because I'd taken my confirmation, and I was very worried that when I got on this spiritual path that you know, Christ wouldn't accept me, that being a Christian was, you know, that I'd somehow done something wrong. And so in one of my first meditations, which was near Stanford University where I was working, I had this experience of having my headphones on, learning to meditate, and the train, look, I lived right on the train tracks, and the trains would come by. You know, you had to have headphones when you meditated. And so I had this experience of meditating, and in my third eye, which is right here, a vision of Christ came into my third eye. And it was like it was saying, don't worry, I'm here, we're all here. It's okay, what you're doing is right. You're not, you know, evil or bad because you're meditating. And so that experience just was one of many, but I think a lot of times when we're first getting on the spiritual path, we have those experiences. I haven't had anything like that since. I keep hoping that I'll have some, you know, see Yogananda walk in and sit down by me, but of course we know through these teachings and through meditation that actually the guru is there, that these entities that have left their body are closer than we realize. That's what I got from the near-death experience. And I had others, which I haven't written about yet because they're a little bit too woo-woo, but things that happen to me that make me realize this world that we call heaven or the astral plane is really very near to us, and it's very real. And there's many, these kinds of things will be revealed more and more in books and in videos as we continue in this next 50 years and into this new Yuga.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that personal and profound experience. I think for more and more people to realize that God is ever with us and to have that kind of touch of the divine light at such an early stage in your life, it must have just, you know, really kind of set the tone for your soul's evolution. Would you have any final words of hope and encouragement for us in relation to, again, what the world we are going through? To what you've shared with me today and with all of us has been very inspiring and very encouraging, that, you know, we're moving through this pandemic and all the upheaval and chaos in the world, but really what's happening is it's an ushering of a new age. Can you offer us just anything from your perspective that would just help us, you know, cling ever more deeply like you have to the light, to be warriors of light at this time?
Yes. Well, we're in a transition, and transition periods are always painful. We have transition periods in life when we go from a teenager to being an adult. We have that horrible adolescence, which I don't know about you, but for me it was like, this is really bizarre. But, we have transition periods throughout our life. What we're experiencing is we're experiencing a transition from one old form of civilization to a new form. So it's going to be painful, but this is very important. You incarnated now because your soul knew that this was coming. I think the children know it that are incarnating now. I think on our deepest level, we know that we're here to help others and to really pray and to just know. I mean, for me, this, of course, I live at the Ananda meditation retreat, so I'm in seclusion all the time. But it's been wonderful. For me, it's nothing new. But if you're living in the city, learn to meditate. Reach out to the Ananda community. Find ways that you can uplift yourself. When you uplift yourself and you have positive thoughts about others and for the world, it will help the world. Your thoughts are very important. Your thoughts in the new age will see this. Thoughts are powerful. Thoughts are powerful. So think beautiful thoughts. There's some affirmations in my book that I offer in the 4 stages of yoga that I offer for families, and I have ideas in there for finding a spiritual mate. All these things. Do what you can today. Meditate, pray for others, offer smiles and love to others. See everyone that you see on the street. You're not walking out that much, but everyone you see at the grocery store or the takeout, see them as part of you. Even the most evil people in this world are all connected. We are all part of one whole consciousness that is bringing in this new era. So if you don't like Donald Trump, or if you do like Donald Trump, it makes no difference. He is a part of you. And so, see it as a big play and a Maya, and try to just offer love. People need love. People need prayers. Prayers and love are powerful, and so are your own thoughts that you think. If you think that we're going to have a wonderful civilization after the COVID-19 demolishes everything, then it'll happen. But if you go the other way and think bad thoughts, then you're bringing the consciousness of the planet down, and it'll bring yourself down.
Thank you so much, Nischala, for that.
You're welcome.
Very important reminder about transitions being painful, but the birthing of a new age. And I'm so grateful that you had the time this morning to do this. It was an absolute joy for me to get to spend some time with you. And we'll put a link in the bottom of the video here to the book where people can purchase it on Crystal Clarity. And before we close, are you working on any new projects that you want to give us a little teaser about?
I am, but because my mentor, Swami Kriyananda, who is my teacher, he told me not to talk about.
Okay.
I worked with him very closely for 8 years in his publishing company, and he told me not to. He doesn't talk about things until they're set, but they will be fun and they'll be interesting. And many people have asked me to write more about the 4 stages of yoga, to do more about it. That was a book that took 4 years to write. So I will just say that I am listening myself to different projects that I'm working on as to which one is going to be the one that I'm going to do, finish next. So We will have something new in the hopper for you. In the meantime, there's many wonderful authors through at Crystal Clarity, and many of my close friends I know write books there. But it will be something that I think will be for a broader audience, and it will be, I can hopefully write it with my whole heart, and hopefully what I do, whatever I do with God's grace, will be something that will be helpful and uplifting for others. So I hope you read my book, and if you read it and you like it, you can review it on Amazon.com.
I have read it. I do love it. And again, we'll put the link in for everybody. And thank you again so much for taking the time to be with us and share this morning.
Oh, it's been my great pleasure. It's good to see you, Narayan. I know I can't see you in person, but God bless you.
God bless you and Nakula and Rama and everyone there.
Thank you. Yes.